Be a long one here today. Yeah, pro streamer, 100%. Yeah, no, locked and loaded. Did not get that Twitch affiliate status by accident. Yeah. Whew. All right, so nowhere to go but up on this one here today. Coming up on the stream, we are going to be looking at the big trades that happened in the NHL over the weekend. We have a big NFL trade to get to as well. Plus, we're going to be looking at who should be making more trades in the NHL as we look at the sellers going toward this week's trade deadline. And in the NFL, we are going to be looking at the NFL free agency preview. Was hoping to do this either Thursday or Friday, didn't quite get to it, so doing it today. So this, like last week, we looked at who the big free agents would be the best fit for. Now we're going to put one, looking more at the teams, looking at like giving each team one free agent that would be a perfect fit for them given salary cap constraints and stuff like that. So really looking forward to that one. So we have a lot to discuss. The intro has taken 3 minutes, and I haven't even told you that we're presented by Sea of Dead yet. Check out seaofdead403.ca for that great Calgary swag. Like I was saying on the instant reaction show yesterday, like, you watch that, and how could you not want some Attitude Era inspired Calgary gear? So we have a Stampede Wrestling shirt that has it's Stampede Wrestling written on it with in the style of the old Raw is War logo. So love that one. Plus we got some great Calgary stuff. Always the Calgary Cannons hat. You got to get that. They just tore the building down, but can't tear our hearts down, or something like that. So check it out over at seaofdead403.ca. Plus, we are fueled. I mean, look, we're going to be here for a little bit today. So we got to get that fuel in, and the best place to go for that is Swift Energy. Go to swiftenergy.gg for those of you watching. I got this one in the chat, both in Twitch and in Kick. So check out the link there and use the code PKPrimetime for that 25% off. So nice 4-minute intro with the mic working for most of it means that this is going to be a long one today. We already got questions in the chat. So you know what? Let's start with some of those. It's nice when you have a long rundown, and then you're just going to go with something else to start the show. But Anand asking about the Calgary Flames, and what Anand wants, Anand gets. So let's start with some Calgary Flames talk. So, in the Twitch chat, Anand is asking, Peter, just to get your reaction or thought, saw a tweet from Anthony DeMarco on Twitter and X, Flames interested in Brandon Carlo from Boston. This is where, this is where, like, trade deadline stuff is always so, like, challenging or whatever. Not challenging, it's talking about fucking hockey here, man. But, this is where it gets a little bit interesting, because for approximately 0 seconds of my life have thought about Brandon Carlo fitting in on the Calgary Flames. Like, it's just not a thought that has crossed my mind a whole lot. So I don't know some of the particulars on the old Brandon Carlo contract. Initial reaction before I see a whole lot of that, and honestly, I can't imagine a whole lot is going to change my mind on the matter. It feels like a weird fit to me. Obviously, the Flames, as constituted right now, are not a high-level hockey team by any stretch of the imagination. Oh, apparently we're having some, we're overloading the CPU a little bit, so we'll just check away from Puckpedia. By the way, if there are ever any stream issues or anything, Anand was quick on the mute. Well, Toxic just laughed at me. But let me know, because again, streaming this on multiple things, and that didn't go super well last time, so hoping the old MacBook can hold up this time. But the Flames, as constituted, are not a high-level hockey team. I think they proved that over the weekend. They are a average to below-average hockey team that just so happened to have a guy who's 5'11" and a 7th-round pick between the pipes who's stealing the show and is getting to the point where, like, forget Calder votes. This guy should be maybe not first-place Vezina votes, but should at least be on a couple of ballots. He has been that good for this Flames team, and so it is weird to say that a team that is, I believe, a point out of a playoff spot going into action today, and a team that is not very good and has some obvious holes should not go and make those improvements. But we know where the Calgary Flames are. This is basically year one of a rebuild, right? Like last year was the teardown year. This year was okay, we're probably still should be tearing down a little bit if we're all being honest with ourselves. But this wasn't the go out and acquire a whole bunch of talent thing. And so Deed's letting us know, $4.1 million, 28-year-old right shot defenseman. I don't see where the fit is. I think that while, yes, Brandon Carlo, if you put him on the Flames today, he is third best defenseman on this team. And so that, by definition, makes him a top four defenseman. And the Flames would need that. I think he has a couple years left on his contract after this. And so if you do that, you're probably moving Rasmus. Like that's kind of what my thought is that if you are going to make that move, that means you have something bigger down the line for Rasmus Andersson, and you don't want to just completely tank things. And now all of a sudden you have guys playing minutes that you're not necessarily expecting them to. But I still don't love it. That is the type of move that I don't think this team should be making. And I have said for a bit that the Flames just going full on everything must go, every game must be lost is not the way to go. I hate that about rebuilds, and I think we have seen a lot of times where it is very difficult to come out of those because losing becomes okay. And the Flames have done a great job of making losing not be okay with this group, and so you are getting some valuable experience, and because of that, there's actual stakes, like Sharon Govich being a healthy scratch the other day. That is because he is not playing well, and if you are in a spot where the results don't matter, then you're just letting him play it out, right? You're letting him grind through and whatever. But because you are playing this like the results matter, which any competitive hockey team should, then you are in a spot where you have to kind of show these guys that playing poorly is not part of the equation of things here. So I like how they have gone about it. And I like that the style of rebuild that I like is you try to, as gross as this is in a way of talking about humans, you try to maximize the assets and then play the kids and let the chips fall where they may. You have to keep a couple of adults around to let them know what being an NHL player is like. The Flames have a few of those, and some would argue maybe too many of them, but you let the kids play and you let the chips fall. And right now the chips have fallen where this team is bordering on a playoff spot, but is obviously not good enough to make any kind of noise. If they won a game in the playoffs, I would be stunned, given the quality of the teams that they would be playing if they squeaked into a wild card spot. Like I get, like they have given the Jets some problems, and the Jets have a bit of a goaltending concern of their own once it gets to playoff time. The Jets win that series handily. And whether it's Vegas or Edmonton at the top of the Pacific Division, both of those teams kick the ever-loving shit out of the Flames. So they aren't a team that is going to be making a whole lot of noise. And so I haven't minded how they've gone about this. Trust me, this is all looping back to Carlo. But I am realizing in this moment I forgot my Vyvanse today. So we're going to be on a journey today, folks. But with this, I have kind of justified not tearing this all down because how much worse are they going to get? Like, they aren't winning these games because Rasmus Andersson is dragging this team kicking and screaming into these games. They're not winning these games because Blake Coleman is out here grinding his way through. They're winning the majority of these games because that kid between the pipes is special. And there is a part of me that doesn't want to waste that. There's a logical part of me that this isn't what this team is. Like, there is a very real chance that, I don't even want to say Wolf comes back down to earth. Even if he is just good next year, this is a bottom 10 NHL team by a ton. So I am not saying, like, well, we can't waste the great years of Dustin Wolf, go out and acquire a bunch of guys, but I also don't think that the guys who they have now are keeping them from losing these games. It is almost entirely because of that kid between the pipes. Now, if you want to talk about getting the most for those players, I understand it. The reason I haven't minded how things have been going here is the whole, like, squeak into the playoffs thing has been an MO of the Flames for a very long time. That's why you get Tony Amonte and Owen Nolan and all of those cats in the lineup is because the Flames just wanted to squeak into the playoffs. I genuinely believe that this is different. I genuinely believe that this is a group that the contributors are going to be here for a bit, for the most part. Wolf playing great. You are hoping goalie of the future, and he's going to be here for a really long time. You have, like, Zeri has been their best forward for some stretches. He's going to be here for a bit, like core piece, I would say. Coronado, going to be here for a while. You are hoping. He has been playing well. And then the vets who are playing well are Huberdeau and Kadri, and they're locked up on long-term contracts, and those cats ain't going anywhere, even if you wanted them to. So, Kadri might. But either way, I have justified it as the kids are getting them to this point for the most part, or at least the future pieces are getting them to this point. You go out and make a move like getting a Brandon Carlo, and you start giving up future assets for it, and that's where same old Flames comes in, and that's where the concern comes, where you are just trying to scratch into the playoffs, and that's where a little bit of mismanagement comes. Because at that point, then I don't want to say you have expectations and those are bad, because we talked a little bit before about having accountability, I guess, and having that be the way that they would go. And so I would suggest that bringing in a Carlo, though, does lead you to believe that this team thinks there's something they're not. And that's where you get a little bit concerning to me. Now, again, maybe it is because there might be a move for a Rasmus Andersson, and you don't want to throw Bruce Davich into the lineup before he's ready, or someone else. You don't want to throw one of those guys in the lineup before they are ready. And so you get this a guy who can play in your top four. You feel fine about it. You feel comfortable about it, while you're not giving unwarranted minutes to a guy who maybe isn't ready for them. And to the point, Toxic in the chat, I feel like Rasmus has given up, or he's on a bad decline. I think that there was, I don't think Rasmus has give up in him, to be perfectly honest with you. I think that guy would get into a fist fight over the competitiveness of a game of checkers. He seems like a guy who has to win everything, right? Like, he has to be first one to the buffet. He has to be the first one out the door, the first one finishing around. Like, he has to be that guy, which is why I don't mind having him around, because I think you need that kind of, that type of a guy who's just a winner around your team. And I get that can be overused sometimes. But I do think that he was playing a little or a lot over his head in the first part of the season. And so I think you are just seeing that kind of come crashing down a little bit as well. So I do think that there is a little bit of a regression that has come up with Rasmus Andersson in this particular situation. So I don't think that it is I don't think he's falling off necessarily. I don't think that he has given up, but I do think that there is just a little bit of a dip happening in his game. Also, and this part needs to be remembered throughout the rest of this season, is this team is going through some very, very difficult games on the schedule right now. So let's just be aware that, oh wow, this guy's not playing quite as well. Yeah, because they just played the Caps, the Panthers, and the Hurricanes, and the Lightning in there as well. Like, that is why some of these guys may be starting to wind it down here a little bit. Just a heads up, Twitch people, an ad is coming. Sorry, but, gotta pay the bills and all of those sorts of things. At least it was supposed to, and now I don't know if it actually did or not. But I am going to try to be on the Twitch streams a little bit more cognizant of when the ads are coming, so that you're not missing all the great stuff. But also, Deed's a subscriber. Shout out. We'll want to give you some fun content while we are talking along here as well. So yes, no ad for Deeds. Deeds has been ad-free for a year now, and that is greatly appreciated on my part. So again, thank you so much for that one. Normally I get an ad timer, I'm not getting one, so I'm assuming that we're just going to keep rolling with this one now. But yeah, I am planning on having that. Still having some fun stuff during the ads, but maybe not necessarily giving all the gold away. So no, back on the Rasmus front though, I do think that there is a decline there that is coming, and there is a valuable piece to having him around. But if he doesn't want to be with the Flames, and there could be some of that, right? If he, now it starts. if he doesn't want to be on the Calgary Flames, then you trade him immediately. Like that, his value is never going to be higher. And I do think sometimes that conversation gets a little overblown. Maybe not necessarily in this case, but I would remember like Johnny Gaudreau it was always a conversation around here, right? Like at least it wasn't the conversation the way it has been with Rasmus Andersson, but there's always a little bit of this team isn't doing what we want them to do, and come playoff time, so maybe there should be a start over aspect of it. And no one ever wanted to trade Johnny because he was awesome, right? But you would either get well, you can't trade him now. He just had a bad playoff, and so his value is at his lowest. And then he starts cooking and doing the shit that only Johnny Hockey can do. And it's like, well, you can't trade him now. Look how awesome he is. It's like, so we don't want to trade him. Hey, you can just say that. That's fine. But it would always be like, he would have a 5-game stretch where it wouldn't go well. It's, oh, well, you can't trade him now. Look at his value is tanking. It's like, guys, I know we have a very low opinion on NHL decision makers sometimes. If a 5-game stretch is altering the perception of a guy who has a 200-game sample size, then these guys are inherently very shitty at their job, and I think you can kind of take advantage of them then in a different way. So use that as something where you figure that out, and then try to take advantage of it in a different way. But for Rasmus, he was playing the best hockey of his career, and I don't know how sustainable that was. And so now that it is coming back down to earth, I do think there could be a bit of a shift in his trade value. And so if you have decided unofficially that he doesn't want to stick around with the Calgary Flames, then you trade him now. And you get a bunch of assets back, and then sure, flip a couple for Brandon Carlo if you want. Don't overpay for it. For the love of God, don't overpay for it. But flip him for Carlo, figure it out, and just kind of move on from there. So I do think that I think that if you were to make that move, I would hope that there are layers to it. And it is not just, well, we need another top 4 guy because we've had Joel fucking Hanley in the top 4 for 2 months now. And while that has been surprisingly effective, let's not bank on that one, shall we? And so like a top 4 of Ball, Anderson, Carlo, and Weegar is good, I would suggest, but maybe not necessarily like blow away or anything like that. And I don't think it is moving the needle. Like you would go from being, in my opinion, the 9th best team in the Western Conference to being the 9th best team in the Western Conference. Like that's just, and honestly, 9th might be, you get into a debate about whether you like St. Louis more or Utah more or Calgary, but you know what I mean? Like they aren't all of a sudden, oh, well, now they're better than Colorado. I don't see that part necessarily. A couple other questions here in the chat. Would you say there is an explanation on struggling with offense, mainly scoring? And this is going to sound more dismissive than I want it to, and I promise I am taking it seriously. The reason they are struggling on offense is entirely because they're not that good. That's it, right? Like they have a bunch of kids who could turn into something, but you have a Huberdeau, Kadri, and Coronado line that, while effective, would be it would be Vancouver's second line. It would be Edmonton's third line. It would be Vegas's second or third line. Like we like them a lot. And this is, again, more dismissive than I want to be, but you have a first line that's a second line. You have a second line that's a third line, and you have a third line that's also kind of a second or a third line. And then you have a fourth line that is entirely a fourth line, although playing better than a lot of fourth lines, but not quite a third line. Anyway, that's a lot of lines that we just did on a stream. But, God, I hope no AI catches that one. But you have... You don't have the high-end talent. And that is the big overall thing of all of this, is that the Flames do not have those game breakers yet. And I have said, they have built an excellent foundation that when that game breaker comes, they're set, right? Like if you, just to put a name to it, if you got Elias Pettersson right now, and I'm not saying they should, I'm not saying they will, this is just to be able to visualize that. I guess maybe to calm the hordes. Let's say you get Gavin McKenna. Better? All of a sudden now, you have a top line that would be, let's say, McKenna, Zary, and Coronado. A second line with, like, Huberdeau, Kadri, and Sharon Govich. And a third line, future-wise, of, like, Frost, Backlund, and I don't know, Stromgren or someone. I'm sure I'm forgetting it. I'm sure I'm forgetting guys. But you know what I mean? Like, all of a sudden, like, you have guys who are set up to play with that number one dude. Like, you are just missing that one piece. And I'm not saying they are Elias Pettersson away from going off and making a cup run, but they are a number one center, number one creator away from being a good hockey team. And then you are that and probably another finisher away from being a very good hockey team, assuming the defense progresses in the way that you want it to, and Dustin Wolf his game doesn't fly off a cliff at some point. Like, they are situated in a way where you can get those guys, but you don't have them. And so you have to work really, really hard to try to score in this league. And it's been tough. And Sharon Govich not stepping up has been, or not stepping up feels a little harsh, but having a bit of a step back season has hurt. It absolutely has hurt this team. And that is a setback. And the problem is, like, you don't really have that playmaker that can really help him out in those sorts of ways. And as I said on the radio a couple of times, he's not really a create your own shot kind of a guy. He is he has an excellent shot and he can score from anywhere, but you kind of need someone to get him the puck. And they just haven't found that this season in a way that has been overly consistent. I do think, like, pairing him up with Frost and Farabee is an interesting look. I feel like there should be something that works there with Zari. The other part of it too is that they're trying him down the middle for a little bit as well. And so he is trying to figure out the most important position, and one of them, aside from goalie, the most important position on the ice and one of the more difficult to master, while we're also wondering, hey, why aren't you scoring more? And they took a lot of that pressure off of him over the last little bit, for sure, but that still, you had injuries, and he's trying to learn center at the NHL level with different line mates and all those things, so no shit, it's not going well for that kid. It's like what we tried with the stream here at one point, where I was like, okay, we're really going to hit this thing. And so we're going to have multiple streams, and I'm going to have the vertical camera, and we're going to have all these different things. And then the thing was lagging because, of course it was. I just threw 9 things on top of it. I think that is a little bit of what was going on with Sharon Govich, where, okay, we're going to have new line mates. We're going to try you at center. And we're just going to, oh, by the way, you're going to have the biggest contract you've ever had in the NHL, and teams are going to be focusing on you now. So go. And it didn't work. And so I think next year, just give him the responsibility of you put puck in net. Cool. Once that starts to go, we'll start to maybe build that thing up a little bit. But let's Atomic Habits the shit out of this thing, and just those small wins before we get to the big ones there, shall we? So I think you have a combination of they aren't that good, and the guys who are good aren't playing good, and that becomes a bit of a factor there. Deeds, if you're trading Rass, it tells you that the Flames have given up on the season, in my thoughts, and I don't see that from the Flames. That is entirely true. That's why I wonder about the Carlo thing, because Conroy, to me, doesn't strike me as the guy who is going to go out and make a short-term move like that. Now, again, he made a lot of the moves at the deadline with the thought of, let's bring some guys in and hope that they also start to click a little bit, instead of just purely futures and draft picks and all of those sorts of things, right? So there was a little bit of that, but I just don't see Conroy being like oh no, we're awesome now, let's go finish 8th. He really strikes me as someone smarter than that, which is why the Carlo move seems weird. So that's why I'm wondering about Erasmus thing. And again, no reporting from me. The joke that I always make is that anytime I see the Calgary Flames brass, they introduce themselves to me. So they're not giving me the inside information here or anything like that. This is just maybe you're piecing it together. Like, you get a Carlo because you still want to remain a little bit competitive, which, but you also, if Rasmus doesn't want to be around, you then move that, and you can still be at least a little bit competitive, and you can at least sell that to the owner who wants the team to stay competitive, if that makes sense. It's also that the lines are made up of younger players getting their feet wet in the NHL. Totally, 100%, it is that. You have a lot of guys who are, yeah, like you said, getting their feet wet, figuring out where they all fit in, right? Like, you tried Pospisil at center, that didn't work. You tried Zary at center. I thought that worked. I was a little surprised they didn't bring him back and put him at center. I know maybe you're just kind of easing into it. Also, you got a few already. Like, Kadri isn't moving anywhere off of center. Frost is your guy, and Backlund's there, so you're not going to move him off of that necessarily. But I I liked how he looked down the middle and kind of thought you wanted to experiment with that a little bit more. But yeah, like you have Coronado playing first line minutes for the first time in his career, and all these different young pieces kind of trying to fit in to all these different spots. So there's a learning curve here with a lot of those guys for sure. Sharky needs to play with someone with the driver to be successful. 100% agree on that one. No way Conroy sees the last 3 games and thinks this team is good. Yeah, I don't think you watch this team get dummied in a couple of these games and think, man, you know what? Like that we only got 1 point against Carolina, and we've scored 1 goal in 3 games. But I'll be fucked if we're not a Brandon Carlo away from getting right into this thing. You know, like, you're watching this, like, yeah, I know I would solve every one of the problems out on that ice tonight, and that is Brandon, by God, Carlo. I don't think that's happening, necessarily. So, interesting discussion. Thanks for the chat, and really do appreciate that. Got a nice little half-hour chat on the Flames in today that I wasn't anticipating until I go to 960 tonight, which I'm assuming most Calgary local here. We have, I'm going to be on Sportsnet tonight from 6 to 8 here on Sportsnet 960 The Fan tonight. We have a few things planned. Generally, when we plan things for that show, it doesn't go great. Not that the show doesn't go great, but it's just, we've had to go to a few deeper plans a few times, just because other people have other plans and other shows have other guests. So either way, we have a few fun things planned for tonight, so check us out over on Sportsnet today. Now, it's time to get to the stuff that I actually prepared for the show today, as while there is talk that the Flames might be making some trades, we had some big moves in the NHL over the weekend. So let's get into it. Let's start with what happened with the defending Stanley Cup champions loading up, but trading away a big future piece in the process. And we're none the wiser. The NHL trade period is here. And it's funny, you would hear a bunch of hockey podcasts over the last little bit talking about how annoying it was that, oh man, there's been no movement. There's been no trades. That nothing's been happening lately. Where have all the trades gone? And then all of a sudden, you get boom, 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 boom. We get Seth Jones is traded. This guy traded. It just felt like Saturday, all of a sudden, there was a wave of a bunch of shit happening. And it became a whole lot of fun. Yeah, it was a bit of a buzz on the weekend there. Yeah, the stream so far, and we're going to talk about look shiny, yes, and yeah, shout out Toxic Indeeds, also both talking about the ADHD in the chat. I will say, I'm kicking it old school. I only have ADD. Despite what you see from me today, there isn't a whole lot hyper about your boy, so it's just ADD for me. But either way, Vyvanse works for both of those things. On that note, swiftenergy.gg. Use the code PKPrimetime for 25% off. Okay, to this hockey trade. The Chicago Blackhawks trade Seth Jones and a 2026 fourth to the Florida Panthers for Spencer Knight and a 2026 first. I think overall, this is a win-win, but it is a bit more of a solid win for one and a little bit more of a high-risk win for the other. We'll start with Chicago. I think this makes a ton of sense for Chicago, and I think this is a really good move for the Blackhawks. You turn a defenseman who wasn't going to hang around into a goalie who a lot of people viewed as a franchise goalie not too long ago, and a goalie that Panthers fans, I think, were kind of banking on helping to kind of continue a bit of a run with this franchise. And obviously there was some stuff off the ice, and it seems like he has got that figured out, but there was a lot going on around this guy. And so I don't want to say maybe his value was low, because I don't think it was, but for Chicago, this is a no-brainer type of a move. Seth Jones didn't really want to be there. We mentioned that. And now you turn it into a goalie of the future. And ask any rebuilding team, aside from the aforementioned Calgary Flames, ask any of those teams, what is the hardest part of coming out of the rebuild? It's, let's figure out the goalie. Well, maybe they figured out the goalie now. You at least give yourself a goalie of the future. And those are very difficult to come by in a legitimate sort of a sense. They have been trying to piece together the goalie position there with Mrazek and all of that. And obviously this was not a team that was super hell-bent on being competitive or anything like that, although I think there was a little bit of trying there. And Mrazek being the best option they had between the pipes is suboptimal, I would say. And so I think Chicago has kind of recognized that they were not ready for Connor Bedard. And, well, I mean, they were very much ready to get the draft pick that got them Connor Bedard. They were not ready then to take full advantage of him. And so now if you have a goalie, you can at least mask a few of those deficiencies and allow Connor Bedard to have a little bit more wiggle room, and there's just a little bit more margin for error when you have a goalie who can be that franchise type of a guy. And so I just think this is such a smart move, for Chicago to get that goalie in there and just solidify that part of it. And now you can try to find some of those other high level pieces to piece around a Connor Bedard. And you only have to retain a little bit of salary going up. A little bit of salary going forward with the salary cap going up. So again, it makes a little bit of sense for them because you're basically, this isn't exactly how money works, but you're kind of getting it for free salary cap wise because the cap is expected to go up so much over the next little while that an extra $2.5 million, whatever, you deal with that. And by the time that contract is off the books, then you are in kind of a position where Bedard might be a little bit more expensive, whatever, but you have been able to at least fill a few spots around Connor Bedard. So I have no problem with that one as well. And it gives them a little bit more draft capital to make a few moves with. They said that in the press release, or in talking to the media, I forget which one, but they were talking about, all right, well, this gives us another draft, or a bit more draft capital to go into the market with. I don't think they're expecting to use this draft pick. I think that they kind of recognize that things need to go in a different direction in Chicago very quickly because of Connor Bedard. And I think the real realization around that was Bedard not making the Four Nations roster. And that at the beginning of the year, that seemed almost like a lock. So I think that kind of woke them up. We are not taking advantage of this generational talent that we have. And this isn't just, we got Taves and Kane, and then we went off and won a bunch of games. They had guys around him, right? Or guys around them, sorry, that helped. And they tried that with Taylor Hall. It didn't work. Foligno didn't work. Tyler Bertuzzi predictably didn't work. They kind of understand they need to go out and get some pieces to build around this guy now. And so by adding this draft capital, but having it be in 2026, it allows you a little bit of wiggle room to use that in future trades to really start to bolster this, because you're not going to bolster them at the deadline. But you are probably this offseason going to look to make a few moves to bring some solid players around Connor Bedard. And so having this be a 2026 draft pick just gives you a little bit more time to work with that and find some players of value. So I think this was a really smart move for the Blackhawks, with exactly where they are kind of supposed to be right now. The Panthers, for them, it's an all-in type of a move. Knight is your goalie of the future, but this team is win now. And I don't think Knight was so far away that you couldn't possibly keep him around, but the focus is supposed to be winning this year. And so goalie of the future matters a little bit less when you have goalie of the now, who was spectacular in the postseason last year, albeit a little inconsistent at times in the rest of his career. But you have a guy who, at his best, can be a guy who can steal games for you. So use this now as a trade chip to go out and improve your hockey team. So I understand the go for it move. And Jones is the exact type of player that Florida was looking for. A veteran defenseman on the right side, a guy who not swimming in playoff experience, but a guy who is swimming in NHL experience and is still good. The problem is Chicago, as mentioned, only retains a little bit of money on this one, and that contract, it still feels like a touch of an overpay. So it kind of knocks him down a little bit in value. And I feel like it is, to a large extent, kind of like what's happened with Darnell Nurse, where we see the contracts, this guy's not a $9.5 million player, and so we automatically assume he sucks, because he is not playing up to the level of his contract. He's not a $9.5 million defenseman. He's still a good defenseman in the NHL. I don't even know if he's a $7 million defenseman, though, and that's what Florida is paying for him right now. So it is not without risk on the Panthers side of things, because you gave up a lot to get this guy in. You are giving up $7 million in salary cap space. You are giving up goalie of the future, and you are giving up a first round pick next year. So you're giving up a lot to bring this guy in. Now, if it works, this is a championship level team again, right? Like the blue line was the strength of this team. Well, one of them. When they went on their run in the Stanley Cup final, you lose a piece of that with Montour, and I think I would still rather have Montour than I would Seth Jones, but you at least now can kind of backfill that a little bit, and you have a pretty solid blue line there, and one that can help you out in the postseason again. So if Jones plays up to his contract, then this is an absolute home run. Even if he just plays up to what he can be, I think this is a very solid move for the Blackhawks, and one that I think puts pressure on the rest of the teams in a fairly wide open Eastern Conference. Like I said, overall, I like this for both teams. I think it is the type of move that you make and the type of swing that you take when you are a cup favorite like the Florida Panthers, and I think it is a fantastic return for a rebuilding team and adding a key core piece and a first-round pick to play around with. So I think a very, very solid trade made by both teams, although one team taking on a little bit more risk than the other. We had a couple more trades that went down in the NHL over the last little bit. Let's move out to Nashville and Minnesota as they make a move for a goal scorer who I've always really liked, but this year has kind of fallen off. Let's talk the Wild trade for Gustav Nyquist. The Minnesota Wild are getting in on the trading fun and taking advantage of the tough times out in Nashville, as the Wild have acquired Gustav Nyquist from the Nashville Predators for a second-round pick in 2026. Gus Nyquist is a player that perpetually falls into the I can't quit you category. I think that he has a very good shot. He has, I think, a real good goal-scoring ability. He has a better playmaking ability than I thought when he first kind of broke out in the NHL, but this is a very good hockey player. There is a bit of risk with this one again, though, because he is 35, and he is having just a putrid season with Nashville. Coming off of his best season of his career, he has been doggy doo-doo this year with 9 goals and 12 assists. Now, he is going from a horrendous offensive situation out in Nashville to a pretty good one in Minnesota. We'll see where the Wild are using him, but in Nashville, everything has fallen off this year. It has been the year from hell. Nothing has gone right. And so, yeah, no kidding. This guy doesn't even have the same amount of points right now as he had goals a season ago, but how could you thrive in an offensive situation like that? And so I think it's a smart gamble from Minnesota to see, can this guy in a better offensive system, better offensive setup, take advantage of the skills that he has and help give us a little bit more of a boost in a absurdly loaded Central Division right now with the Jets, Dallas, and Colorado. And we'll talk about the Avalanche in a second. But this gives them a little bit more of a goal-scoring pop. And again, Nashville retaining a little bit of money gives them a little bit more flexibility to make a few more moves coming up here at the deadline. I think they still have around $7 million in salary cap space. So they have some opportunities now to go out and still improve this team while adding quite a bit of potential, I think, to the roster. On the downside of it for Minnesota, second round pick feels like a lot. Second round pick for a rental of Gustav Nyquist, it feels like maybe a bit too much for my blood. But I mean, if there were a bunch of teams that were in there at a 3 and you just wanted him and you felt like there was an actual fit and this is a guy that can help your team, then second and 50% retained, and you kind of move on. So I don't mind it. It does leave a little bit of, or it does just smell a little bit of an overpay, but again, with the retention, it gives them a little bit of wiggle room. And for Nashville, like, this is a no-brainer. I think it's a rental. This team might be moving in a younger direction. He's 35 years old. And even if you want to keep him next year, there's no use in keeping him around this year because this team ain't going anywhere. So maybe you re-sign him in free agency come the offseason. Maybe he just loves country music in Nashville and wants to hang out there for the rest of his career. Well, you can do that still. And now you've gotten a second-round pick for him, which, again, feels like the maximum amount of value you're going to get for a Gustav Nyquist. So it's making the best of a bad situation out in Nashville. Let's move on to the last of the notable trades from the weekend, as the New York Rangers and Colorado Avalanche made a very interesting swap. The overhaul with the New York Rangers continues as they send Ryan Lindgren, with only 50% of his salary, Jimmy Vesey, and Hank Kempf to the Rangers for Juuso Parssinen, Calvin DeHaan, a 2025 second, and a 2025 fourth round pick. The Avalanche here get a solid defenseman while adding a little bit of depth as well. Lindgren is the big piece of the whole thing. Just a strong minutes eater, solidifies the top four, gives him a strong penalty killer as well. Like, I don't think he's going to dazzle with a whole lot on offense, but he is going to be just a real stud on that blue line to help out this Avalanche team that was looking for a little bit more of a boost in that area. And so when Manson comes back, a top four of Makar, Taves, and then Lindgren and Manson, I think that's pretty good. I think that gives you actually quite a very solid blue line back there for the Avalanche. You get a team maybe known a little bit more for that goal scoring, but they have the best defensive pair in the league in Makar and Taves, and now you solidify that with a very good 3-4 and just a solid, strong guy who plays that playoff style hockey that you really need. I think this is a very good pickup for the Avalanche. Jimmy Vesey, it hasn't really clicked in the way that a lot of people thought it would for Vesey at any point really in his NHL career. And there's been a lot of teams that have thought, oh no, we'll just throw that guy into our mix and we'll get him. He'll be our guy. And it just hasn't really clicked in that way. But he is still someone, when things are going, he can put the puck in the net. And it's a little bit more forward depth for a team that has just been ravaged by injuries and already had some depth issues because of a tough salary cap situation. So I don't think if the Avalanche are skating around with the Stanley Cup, we're going to be looking back on it and going, oh my God, I can't believe they stole Jimmy Vesey away from the Rangers. But I think that this is a solid depth piece to add for them as well. On the Rangers side, you don't get a ton right now. It is a bit of a rental with Lindgren being a free agent, but Parsonen and DeHaan, they aren't going to add a whole lot to the team this year. It's about the draft picks for the Rangers, which again is weird to say with a team that has that much talent and is still close to a playoff spot. But it does kind of seem like the whole they want to go in a different direction thing has really been solidified in the last little bit. And so if they want to just like blow some things up, they could really make this a very interesting NHL trade deadline. But yeah, I think the Avalanche, if we're going to grade this one, I think the Avalanche get the check mark there with a pretty strong, solid move there from this team. So that is the trades that have happened. What about ones that should happen? We're going to start our preview of the NHL trade deadline as we look at who should be the sellers going towards Friday's trade deadline. So let's dive in and look at who should be selling off some pieces come Friday. The NHL trade deadline is Friday, and we've had a little bit of movement. We had some big early season trades, and now the market has reset. So who should be making the future type moves, we'll say? Here are 5 teams that should be sellers at this NHL trade deadline. Up first for me, the New York Islanders. They have been able to squeak into the playoffs on a few occasions and even pushed in a little bit deeper at some times. But this is an aging group, and it does need a little bit of a reset now out in New York. With Barzal and Horvat, a couple other young pieces that you have, a few pretty strong spots on the blue line. This is a team that could turn it around pretty quickly. And they have a couple of rental type pieces or guys on 2-year contracts that could get a little bit of value for them. And so I just think the Islanders are in a spot that they need to make some moves here and just kind of reset things a little bit around what is still, I think, a pretty solid core. Speaking of cores, the Pittsburgh Penguins are a team that I think need to sell off a few pieces. Not full-on teardown, like you're not trading Letang, Malkin, all of those guys, but they're stuck, and they're not going anywhere, and they tried to build a last gasp winner around Sidney Crosby, and it's not working. And it does feel like you are kind of wasting some of the years of Sidney Crosby, who still, as we saw at the Four Nations, is still quite good at the sport of hockey. But it has been an absolute waste. And so look, if Pittsburgh this week decides like, look, it ain't going to work. Like, we're just not going to get there. It would be tough to be the guy who trades away a bunch of franchise cornerstones and a potential revolt out in Pittsburgh, but it's not going great. And if they just wanted to, like, yeah, Crosby to Colorado, fine, we'll do it. We'll tap. Everyone wants it. We'll give it to you. I think that could be like they could get at least a little bit for some of those guys and then really start over. But I do think that there'll be a couple kind of secondary pieces for them to try to move on from. Our third seller, the Nashville Predators. They already started it with the Gus Nyquist trade. They took a huge swing in the offseason. Everyone thought they were the winners of the offseason, including me. Just didn't work out all that well. So they are in a difficult spot right now. And so I think that they are much more future focused now in Nashville and going to be making a few of those moves. Number 4, the Seattle Kraken, another team that took a couple of big shots in the offseason, signing Montour and Chandler Stevenson with kind of win now type of moves. Well, they're not. So I think that there are a few ways that this team can be competitive in a little bit, but they obviously are not the Vegas Golden Knights of expansion teams. They just have not been able to add that high-level talent in the same way that Vegas did. And so I think trying to add a few of those pieces and build up that organizational depth is the way to go. And the last one here, the Buffalo Sabres. Again, not a full-on teardown, which would sting because they've done a couple of those now, and it just hasn't clicked in the way that they would want it to. They have such an exciting young blue line and a very good forward in Tage Thompson to build around, but they just need a few more good pieces around those guys to come out of this rebuild here. And so I do wonder if there is just a little bit more that comes from this team. And like a lot of talk around Cousins, a lot of talk in Calgary around Cousins. I've never thought that the two teams match just because what the Flames have that's expendable, Buffalo doesn't want. Buffalo's already set on the blue line, and the Flames have a ton on D that they could trade to try to swing a move like that, and it hasn't really gotten there. So I think that Buffalo wants a little bit more scoring. Calgary doesn't have that in spades, let's say, to move on from. So I don't think that's a match. But I do think that if they turned Cousins into a couple of pretty good offensive pieces, then things could start to roll a little bit in Buffalo. Not that Cousins is holding them back. It's just they need more than a Dylan Cousins on their team right now. So that is the NHL story. Again, I'm going to be on Sportsnet 960 The Fan Monday night at 6 o'clock, talking a little bit more NHL, and I'm going to be on the rest of the week. I don't know what I'm doing for trade deadline yet, so keep it locked on my social media accounts. I am at Primetime Climb basically everywhere. Check me out there. I'm going to be doing something on trade deadline day. I just don't know what or where yet. But the NHL, not the only league that had some trades this weekend, as a very smart move was made in the National Football League with a player that I like a lot. So let's talk some NFL trades now, shall we? The National Football League offseason is ramping up as free agency officially is a week away, and teams are already starting to shuffle around some pieces to see where they might be able to find some value. And the Washington Commanders, I think, found a fair amount of it as they acquired Deebo Samuel from the San Francisco 49ers for a 5th-round pick. I really like this for Washington. A couple years ago, I thought Deebo was the best receiver in the league, with just how tough he was to bring down, how versatile he was. I think that he is an incredibly talented guy. Now, I don't think he's best receiver in the league anymore, but I do think that there is still a lot of talent there, and it has been tough to keep him on the field. And I think that part of that is because of he just doesn't go down, and he is tough to bring down, and he is versatile, so he's used a lot, so he's taking a lot of contact and all of those things, but there's still a very talented player in there. And so I don't know if he is a number one. I don't know if McLaurin is a number one, but they're both like at worst 1Bs. And so I think you have a very high level now 1-2 punch that you can work with as an offense here with Jaden Daniels. And again, it's a really fun offense or a really fun weapon, for this offense to kind of play around with and see. They were a little bit creative offensively this year. Daniels kind of allows for that. But now with Deebo, you just add another very talented piece that can help this team get to another level. So now you have, we'll see what happens with the running backs this year, but Robinson and Eckler are strong, solid running backs. With McLaurin and with Deebo Samuel, that's a very good kind of offensive foundation that you have built. And so we'll get to the free agency preview here in a little bit. I'll let you know I didn't go offensive line for these guys because I think there could still be some of that in the draft they can maybe go out and acquire. And this isn't a fantastic offensive line free agent class either. But if they can solidify that free agent or that offensive line, then you really have something out in Washington as kind of a not going to love this because they're in the division, but kind of a poor man's Eagles, where like McLaurin and Deebo are your Brown and Smith. And Robinson and Eckler don't really get you very close to Saquon Barkley, but you are still building up a very fun offense out there, but a lot of that does depend now on the trenches. For San Francisco, this is the type of move that you have to make when the bill starts to come due a little bit. You have a young quarterback who you've been able to really build around for the last little while, but now that is going to be a very big ticket in the next little while, or you're going to be getting rid of him and you're going to be looking in a new direction anyway. So it's a cap casualty. It frees up some space. Deebo wasn't much of a factor there last year. They have a ton of weapons that they really like out in San Francisco, and so losing your third or fourth best one isn't going to crush you all that much. So it is not a big return. But it does free up a little bit of cap space and does help with whatever Brock Purdy's next contract is going to be, or whatever their salary cap sheet is going to look like when they have whoever at the quarterback spot. So not a great move for the Niners, but certainly a necessary move for the San Francisco 49ers. Toxic in the chat. If you're the Commanders, you have to take advantage of this with Jaden Daniels still on his rookie contract. 100%. Yeah, like you have... San Francisco took advantage of Brock Purdy on a rookie contract. Now, he has turned into a better quarterback than we thought, but Jaden Daniels has a much higher ceiling, we believe, than Brock Purdy does. And so if San Francisco can take advantage of that, you absolutely have to. And so, yeah, maybe this does speed up the timeline a little bit because you just made it to the NFC Conference Championship game after years of irrelevance for that football club. And so, yeah, you have to take advantage of this while Jaden Daniels is still on that rookie contract. And they have, they have salary cap space to play around with, for sure. But they do need to, they because it's not a great free agency class offensive line, you still, maybe you go out and just overpay on a couple of guys on the O-line for a couple of years and just make sure that's solid and try to draft and kind of backfill around that. So Washington now, it's so interesting. And it does remind you, as you come up on the draft here, like they are in a completely different space now. There is a real confidence around this team that there just wasn't before. There is a real kind of established, like, this is our team that just wasn't there before. And it's one piece and it's one quarterback changes the entire direction of the franchise. And so that is why you still have, even though we talked about this during the season, even though Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are like top 15 prospects, but not the top 2 best players in this draft, you still have teams considering taking them at 1 and 2, because if you hit that, it sets you up for years, and it can change the dynamic of your team in a heartbeat. Like Tennessee, we talked about it here before. Tennessee, I don't think is a bad football team. They were in quite a few games, but their quarterback cost them games. And Cleveland had a good roster, and they tried to take a home run swing with a guy who you definitely shouldn't have with, and it set them back years. And so the quarterback spot, it is a high variance thing because it can set you up for years and years and years, or it can set you back for years and years and years. And that's why it is not just getting a guy, but getting the right guy that is so important. And we see that a lot in what we're going to talk about here now, as it is NFL free agency time. The free agency market officially opens next week, and so we're getting ready for that. And Daniel Jeremiah, who obviously I take a lot of inspiration's a bit much, but I do listen to a lot, and I think he's a very smart football guy. He has said basically every move that you see on free agency day is to make up for a failing at the draft at some point. That might be a little oversimplifying, but there are still a lot of holes that teams have tried to fill in cheaper ways that now they're going to have to spend a whole lot of money on. So let's help them with that as we run through and give every NFL team one free agent that fits their needs in a very big way. NFL free agency is almost upon us, and a lot of teams have a lot of money and a lot of needs. And so we're going to help them today as we find the best fit for each NFL team in free agency. I did this by salary cap space, and I did this by salary cap space based on Spotrac, which I think is the best for NFL salary information. But some of these might be a little bit off, but either way, I still like this is basically ranked in order of salary cap space. So if I'm off on a couple of teams, apologies, but that's just going off the information that I had. We also did have a bit of a move today as well, as Schefter tweeted out a bit ago, or am I just losing my mind? No, the Philadelphia Eagles are reportedly parting ways with 6-time Pro Bowl corner Darius Slay. So Philadelphia getting a little bit more salary cap space, but that one, I didn't factor that one in too much for them because I had a pretty straight line on where I thought they should go. But anyway, here are now the, I think, best fits for each team in NFL free agency based on like who could be available, salary cap space, and obviously roster needs. And so I basically did this like a draft where the teams that had the most salary cap space got first dibs, essentially. And so for the New England Patriots, who have the most salary cap space of anybody in the NFL, I went with Ronnie Stanley. They have a very big need on the offensive line. They probably have a couple very big needs on the offensive line. And they have the most salary cap space to fill it. And Ronnie Stanley might be the best just available player in free agency, coming off of a very good season with the Baltimore Ravens. The Vegas Raiders are up next. And I think a lot of people would go quarterback here with the Raiders. While acknowledging a need, I think that they might try to go a bit more of the value route on that one, so to speak. And so I think while this should be a position of value, I think they're going to try to go out and get one of the big names at it. And so I have for the Raiders with, I have them going Aaron Jones. We did this in the like best fits for each free agent, and there's a couple that kind of cross over here, but I just think this makes so much sense. You have Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly. Pete Carroll has always had a bruising running back, and now, mostly it was Marshawn Lynch. But he has always had a good running back on his teams, even going back to his SC days where you had White and Reggie Bush back there, right? Like he has always had, I don't want to say a run first, but he has always really liked having good running backs. Chip Kelly, his offense was frustratingly run first out in Ohio State, given the talent they had at wide receiver, and now they end up winning championship out of it. But still, he was a run first type of a guy. And so this team has no talent at running back. Like I don't think they are planning on going into this year with the running backs that they had last year, kind of carrying the, like, I don't think Alexander Madison is going to be the one who's, yeah, nope, that's our guy. And so I think they go out and get best available and load up with Aaron Jones, and then probably even draft another running back, either day 2 or day 3 in a pretty good running back class. Washington, talked about them with the Deebo Samuel trade earlier in the podcast. I have said before that I think that they need offensive line help, and they obviously need offensive line help, but I think that the offensive line free agency this year is lacking a little bit. And Washington still has a few holes on their team. And this is a very good year in the draft for offensive line depth. So I think they maybe take a shot with that and instead try to fill what also is a need, and that is on the defensive line. And so Milton Williams, defensive tackle who just won a Super Bowl with the Philadelphia Eagles, I have him going to Washington. This offense obviously stepped up in a big time way, but the defense was a downside. And so adding a champion like this from the Eagles, some institutional knowledge of the NFC East, and give Dan Quinn some actual talent to play around with, I think is a very good fit. And so you hope that the draft, you can kind of fill in some of the holes there and now use some of the salary cap space that you have to go out and solidify the defense and just kind of round out your team a little bit more. Chicago, they need offensive line help at all costs. Like, that defense is actually good, and they have a few weapons and they have a quarterback that you believe in. So they are going to be the ones who are really going to try to load up here in free agency on the offensive line. And so it's weird to say, well, they don't have as many holes as the team that went to the conference championship, but I think that was just a phenomenal coaching job that helped get them there. And Jaden Daniels was special. But for for Chicago, like, it was so obvious that the offensive line was a problem right away, and it was all season long. So I think they go out and add a big name and go get Cam Robinson on at the offensive tackle. And honestly, I could see them double or triple dipping in the draft as well. Moving to the Arizona Cardinals. I have them going with Josh Sweat. Offensively, I think they have enough pieces that they can kind of figure it out. The defense, they just need talent, and they just need players. And one thing that can kind of mask a few talent deficiencies is if you have a guy who can get after the quarterback. And we saw Sweat just bull rush a tackle into Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. This is a very good, aggressive pass rusher. And so if he stays out on the market, I think that this is a guy who would fit with Arizona very well. Moving on to the Los Angeles Chargers, I have them going with Amari Cooper. He struggled with the Buffalo Bills, but I do think that Amari with Ladd McConkey is a nice 1-2 punch. They are, I think, maybe a little bit more vulnerable on defense than I initially thought, but they coached up a heck of a defense last year. And so I think that they are going to maybe focus a little bit more on the offensive side of the football here this season. This one might get a few people riled up, but I have Sam Darnold going to Minnesota. I think Minnesota is close. And I think it would be a real gamble to roll with JJ McCarthy. And you know what? We're good. Given that he had a lot of question marks coming into last season and then gets banged up, I just think you saw that it works with Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold finally was in a place that was maximizing him and getting the most out of him. And now it fell apart down the stretch. And so maybe that helps you get a bit of a value play on this one for Minnesota, and you can maybe shave a couple bucks off of that. But this team is right there. And so you could make the argument that, okay, they're right there. Let's really bolster some other spots. Hope that the rookie kid works out. Maybe get a Jacoby Brissett or someone behind him. No, don't do Jacoby Brissett, but you know what I mean? Like, get veteran quarterback X behind him and just hope that JJ has it figured out, but really load up the talent around him. I could see that. I just think you saw that this worked. It had no right working as well as it did. But now with another year in the system and a little bit less unpredictability maybe than a JJ McCarthy, I think it makes sense for Minnesota to make this move. So I have them sticking with Sam Darnold. Speaking of teams that are sticking with their guys, I actually have a couple now. As T. Higgins, I have him sticking around with the Cincinnati Bengals. Cincinnati. Eye contact here. Just pay the man. You have an elite offense. You have people excited to come to your football games. You have your franchise quarterback saying, pay that man. So, pay the man. They have other needs, 100% they do. But you have such a high-level offense. Just pay the guy. Just pay the guy. And it's a good spot for him as well. Pittsburgh Steelers, I have them sticking with Justin Fields. I think they had a good start with him, but it was obvious that there was a little bit of room for growth. So let him keep growing and see if you can continue to maximize what you have in that guy. And so I think Justin Fields makes a whole lot of sense there. Moving on to the Tennessee Titans. They have the first overall pick in the draft. And so maybe there are a few things that they can add to, but I'm going on the defensive side. I'm going Asante Samuel Jr. He's only 25 years old, so it is adding some talent in free agency, but some youth as well on the defensive side. You're obviously tempted to go offensive line with the potential of bringing in a young quarterback, but they used their first-round pick the last 2 years on offensive tackles. So I think you let those guys develop and try to really solidify things on the defensive side with Asante Samuel Jr. The Detroit Lions, I have them going with Khalil Mack, adding a little bit of pass rush depth that they needed after their depth was severely exposed with all the injuries that they had, but everything really fell off a cliff after Aiden Hutchinson's injury. And so Mack, he is not one that you build an entire defense around, but he is still someone that can get after the quarterback and put that pressure on while the other guy takes up like double teams and stuff like that. So I think he is a good complementary piece, but he is still good enough that if there is another injury, he can still go out and wreck a couple of games here and there. San Francisco, I have them going with DJ Reed. They need to get some help at defensive back, and he has some familiarity with the system there. So I think that one works for San Francisco. For the Giants, I have them going Chris Godwin. Again, they are desperate for basically talent, but I think they really showed how win now they are looking to be by being in the Matthew Stafford sweepstakes. And so I think you go out Godwin is probably going to be at a bit of a value because of the injury that he is coming off of. And you're not asking him to be your number one. Just be a number two along with Malik Neighbors, and whatever young quarterback you bring in, now you have a couple of weapons that he can go to. The obvious concern is the offensive line. I think they probably add a few pieces in free agency and then draft heavy at that position in the second round, depending on where they go with that first round pick, whether they do end up getting a quarterback there, or if both quarterbacks have come off the board, if you get a Travis Hunter or something along those lines to add to that offense, or I guess Hunter adds to both sides. But again, the free agency class for offensive tackles specifically is severely lacking. And so I do think that them just adding some weapons and then going out and addressing that in the draft, like the draft and the free agency really balance themselves out. It is just a bit of a gamble going with the rookie offensive lineman there when New York does feel quite a bit of pressure to win right now. The Green Bay Packers, I have them going with Carlton Davis in their secondary. They just need so much help on defense. He is a solid man-to-man corner, and Green Bay played the third most man in the NFL this season, so he fits the style very, very well there. The LA Rams, I have them going with Dre Greenlaw. I think you have a very exciting young defensive core out in Los Angeles. And I think Greenlaw, as someone who has been close to the top of the mountaintop before, coming in and being the adult in the room and being kind of the tone setter for that group and just giving you another very talented piece on the defensive side is an interesting call. And so I think that the Rams taking from the San Francisco 49ers would be very intriguing for them, as they are a little bit closer than maybe a lot of people thought they were going into last year. The Denver Broncos, I have them going with Byron Murphy. The defense played well this year, but they did get beat up in that playoff game. Murphy, a solid, versatile corner that can help this team out. Jacksonville, Javon Holland, the safety, formerly of Miami, I believe. They allowed a lot of explosive plays, Jacksonville did, a season ago, and he could help on the back end there. The Indianapolis Colts, we're now getting into a few of the teams that didn't have as much of the high-level salary cap space, and so this is where I think a few more of the offensive linemen now start to come back in, as their value kind of matches a little bit more with what the teams in the middle to back part of the cap space availability had. So I have Tevin Jenkins being the one going to the Indianapolis Colts. He is still a good young guard that can help out on the interior of this offensive line that just had some struggles. And when you have Anthony Richardson, who'll be looking to run, Jonathan Taylor, a very good running back, you need some help inside, and he provides that in, I think, a really strong way. Also, the ever-exciting guard pick. We do that with Carolina as well, as they go Kevin Zeitler in this. You have a smaller quarterback, so obviously, like the blindside thing, Sandra Bullock taught us how important that is, but you also, with a smaller quarterback, you need that help on the interior so that you don't have guys just pushing into his face and changing some of the throwing angles a little bit. Getting a solid guard like Kevin Zeitler, I think, helps them out in that way. Next, we get to the defending Super Bowl champions, the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think they just stay with what works. It's not a position they spend a whole lot on, but I think them and Zach Bond is the perfect marriage. It's kind of like Sam Darnold with Minnesota before. I think Bond, this was obviously best case scenario season for him. It was a team that kind of maximized him and got the most out of him. And for them, like this was someone that you kind of plucked out of nowhere. And so if you have to pay him a little bit extra, he was such a valuable part of your defense. How can you let that go? So I think that it's a perfect marriage that those two have to come together on. For the New York Jets, I have DeMarcus Lawrence coming off of an injury. So it's a good addition to the Jets pass rush that needs some help, and they are limited in the cap space area. So I think that could be a move that maybe helps them out. Baltimore, I have them going Stephon Gilmore. Vet cornerback can help out in a secondary that had some major struggles a season ago. Miami, I have them going Chase Young. Again, he is looking for a few more shorter-term contracts, and maybe because of that, the dollar figure might price him out of Miami's limited salary cap range. But I do wonder if he wants to go to a bit more of a competitive atmosphere. Miami, almost by default, is going to be the second best team in that division. They already have the offense set. If they can get that defense back to where they were at the first part of I guess now 2 seasons ago, before Bradley Chubb and all them got hurt, this could still be a good football team. And so Chase Young, I think, kind of helps them out there. Tampa Bay also going with an edge rusher in Dante Fowler. They need to be able to get some big stops that really did help them, or did hurt them, down the stretch. And in that playoff game against Daniels, who was just able to sit there and do anything that he wanted, they were never able to get pressure off the edge. And so Dante Fowler, he doesn't fix everything, but they don't really have the cap space to find that fix everything type of a guy. And I think Fowler can be a bit of a veteran coming in at a bit of a value that can help them out in free agency. Moving on to the Houston Texans. I have them going receiver here. And this isn't a great wide receiver class, but I have them going Keenan Allen. And now, a guy who has been banged up a lot, to fill in for a team that has receivers who've been banged up a lot feels like you are just asking for injury problems. But I think he is a solid vet, can be a reliable number 2, while Tank Dell is recovering from a horrific injury. And if Dell can come back this year, then he is a very, very good number 3 to go along with Nico Collins, who has really established himself as a legit true number 1 in the National Football League. And so, again, this is probably going to be a bit of a value play with Houston being pretty well tied up in salary cap space. For the Dallas Cowboys, I have them going with Jedrick Wills, the offensive tackle. Could be a good value for a team that needs help on the offensive line. Atlanta, I have them going with Mike Jackson. He held up with being kind of the main guy out in Carolina, but he was on a defense that struggled. And so maybe that brings his value down to a point where the Falcons can bring him in. They need so much help in that secondary. And so this can't be the only move that they make, but it can be a really, really solid move, I think, for them to kind of help out a little bit on in that secondary. Seattle. The obvious need is offensive line. But again, they are in negative salary cap space right now. And there's just, you're not, if you're bringing in an offensive lineman for basically a league min contract, then you're just adding to the problem anyway. So draft that position like 8 times in the draft and go out and address some of these needs. Now, maybe they free up a little bit of salary cap space by the time you're watching this or listening to this with a Tyler Lockett move or something along those lines. But for the time being, they don't really have a whole lot of cap space. And so I have them going on the defensive side with Sebastian Joseph Day. Again, they don't have the cap space to fill the needs they have on the offensive line. So you add a versatile player on the defensive line to help build out a little bit of that depth that you can you take care of some of the depth with one player at a couple of positions. I think that is probably the way to go for a team that is looking for value right now. The Buffalo Bills are all loaded up on salary cap right now. So again, not a ton of space to work with. I have them going out and getting Chauncey Golston. Had a strong year with the Cowboys, so there could be something there. A lot of the higher ticket defensive end options, I think, might take some of the obvious needs. And so I think Golston, it might have his value brought down a little bit, and that's where it could kind of pair up with what the Buffalo Bills are looking to do. 3 more here. We have Justin Reed, the safety, sticking around with the Kansas City Chiefs. He is such a huge part of what they do on that defense. I think they find a way to bring him back. The Cleveland Browns. I have them going with guard Aaron Banks, a potential value play to the interior of the offensive line, again, because of the Deshaun Watson situation. Maybe they get a ton of cap space, or maybe they get none. But right now they are sitting with exactly none. So there is... you have to look for values, and I think they do on the offensive line. And lastly, the New Orleans Saints. Marcus Davenport, defensive end. They have minus $47 million in salary cap space, which means you have to take a shot on a guy who has played like 3 games, or barely played at all in the last few years. So some risk built in, but maybe a bit of a reward for a team that is just looking for some talent right now. So all 32 teams with one fit for free agency. Going to continue to look at NFL free agency throughout the week as we head towards the big day next week. So that is going to do it for the sports podcast portion of the live stream today. Again, if you are listening or in podcast form or watching on YouTube, you can get these episodes early and a lot of these segments very early over on twitch.tv/primetimepk. Also now streaming on kick.com/primetimepk as well. Looking to do a little bit more on YouTube as probably in April. March, there isn't going to be a whole lot here. I'll let you know that right now. And so that is a little bit of it. So for sportsy content here on Twitch and on Kick, and YouTube and podcasts as well, it's going to be a little all over the place for the next week. And then the live streams are going to stop for a little bit unless something major happens, because your boy's going to Japan for 3 weeks. Nice little vacation for me, heading off to Japan starting on March 10th. So unless something gigantic happens, or I have a surprising day off in Japan and just want to talk to y'all at what will probably be 2 a.m. your time, not much for live streams beyond this week. And so a lot of this week on the podcast, or on the live streams here, is going to be pre-taping a lot of content for podcast and YouTube and stuff like that down the road. So that is what you guys can kind of brace for here, podcast-wise, for the next little bit. But the sports podcast is wrapped up, as always, presented by Sea of Dead. Check out seaofdead403.ca for that great Calgary swag. We got the Cannons hat. Like I mentioned before, we got some Stampede Wrestling stuff as well. And get that fuel at Swift Energy. Go to swiftenergy.gg. For those on Kick and Twitch, I put the link in the podcast, or put the link in the chat, right at the beginning. Go back, check out, they got some really great flavors that kind of just help you fuel to get through listening to me talk for a couple of hours about the world of sports. So for sportsy people, that is it for the podcast today. For live streamers, hang out for a second and we'll get to the fighting portion of today's podcast in just 1 second. But that is going to do it for part 1 of today's podcast.